Hello, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about my June reading statistics and wrapping up all of the books that I read. June was actually a pretty good month. I didn't read like a crazy amount of books, but when I look back on it, and we'll see this in just a second, I feel pretty positively about most of the books I read. This is the most 5 stars I've had in a really long time, and even though I had quite a few 2 stars, it just felt good to be able to rate more than just one book 5 stars. I haven't had a single month this year where I've had more than one book that I thought was going to be a favorite by the end of the year, and a few months I've not really even had any. I had 4 books that I think are going to make it on my favorites of the year list. First up, I read 1,945 pages in the month of June, which averages out to very close to 65 pages a day, which is actually what my technical goal is supposed to be. If you've watched my mid-year statistics video, you know that I thought my goal was 60 pages a day and it was actually 65, so I was a little confused, but I am saying as long as I get between 60 and 65, I'm really happy, so I'm very happy with that number. My audiobooks were down this month. I had approximately 47 hours listened to, which puts me at about 1.5 hours a day. I'm totally fine with it being whatever it wants to be. I don't technically care about my audiobook listening like statistics. I just like to track them. Now, the thing that looks really bizarre here is my rating chart. I had 0 1-star books and 0 4-star books, but I had 5 5-star books. I believe one of those was a 4.5 technically. I had 2 3-star books, and I had 4 2-star books. So just like a really weird split. And all of that together led me to have an average of a 3.4 rating. That's about what I've been getting all year long, to be honest. So it didn't change much from other months, but it just felt a lot better to have. So I read 11 books this month. I took 1 off of my paused shelf. I did not finish it. I decided to DNF it. And I DNF'd 8 books. So I think some of why I have no 4 stars and no 1 stars is because I DNF'd a lot of books. I'm not saying that I DNF'd books that were going to be 4 stars, but I basically, while reading books, if I just wasn't feeling it this month, the past few months I've been pushing through. I don't know why. I am a huge fan of DNFing. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, and I just haven't been doing it. So this month I went ham with DNFing, and I basically DNF'd anything I wasn't in the mood for. I found myself really in the mood for fantasy this month. As you can see, it's almost 50% of what I read this month, and so I let myself like really just get into the fantasy. And so a lot of the books I was DNFing were not fantasy. They were like thrillers or mysteries, or I think there was even a horror on there. 18% of the books I read were horror, which is 2 books. I then also read 1 dystopian, 1 fantasy romance, 1 thriller, and 1 graphic novel. The graphic novel was a horror graphic novel, and it was actually the lowest book that I read this month. I really did not enjoy that book, and I can't recommend it. I hauled 5 books this month. I've been trying to haul less, but I ordered some technically before June started, and they arrived in June, so I forgot to put them in May, so I just threw them in here. So I only technically, I think, hauled 2 books this month, but I read 2 of the books. I'm currently reading one of them. I actively read the other one and finished it, and so that leaves my NTBR just up 2. But I did work really hard on my own TBR this month, and I got it down to 32 books from 37. I'm thinking next month I should be able to get it below 30. I'm really hoping. I would really like to see that happen. As for arcs, I had 12 coming into the month. I have 11 leaving the month. For pre-orders, I have 4 and 4, but those 4 have changed a little bit. So Glow came in to me, so that one came off of the shelf. And then I had previously pre-ordered a book that was like a TikTok sensation and decided after some negative reviews to cancel my pre-order. And then while I was doing that, I decided to cancel my pre-order on another book because I decided that I would rather just borrow that one from my library because I really wasn't sure about it. It was a beautiful book, and that's why I had pre-ordered it. So I'm like, no, I don't need to be having that. But I did end up, after I canceled one of those, switching it to The Genesis of Misery because I am very excited about that book and I can't stop thinking about it. So I upped one. But all of that comes back to a net of 4. And then my currently reads was at 3 when I came into the month and is leaving at 3, which is really odd because I'm never currently reading 3 books. I mean, clearly, according to this, that's wrong, but I usually am only currently reading 2 books. That's just an interesting thing that I've been doing to myself. As for age demographic, I also think part of this is why I had so many 5 stars is I was just loving the adult books right now. I have 8 adult books, 1 new adult and 2 YA. Once again, no middle grade. I think I'm gonna have to change that so that I can at least have like 1 middle grade before the end of the year. So if you have any middle grade recommendations, leave them down below. I'll check them out. And then books where I read them from, I read 36% owned. So that was 4 books off my own shelf. I know that doesn't equal 37 minus 32, especially with the additions that I had. I did do an unhaul this month and I decided to get rid of a few books. I basically, the video is not out yet, but I was reading a bunch of John Gwynne and I decided I didn't want to continue reading him. I think he's a perfectly fine author. I just don't think he's for me. And then I read 5 library books and 2 ARCs. How I read them was I had 2 physical books, which is kind of low for me. Usually I'm around 3 to 4 physical books and then like an ebook, but I had 3 ebooks. So I don't know what was up this month, but I was feeling the ebooks and I'm okay with that. And then I had 6 audiobooks, which is, you know, about average, just kind of how normal things go. So let's discuss what I thought about all of the books that I read this month. 11 is like a nice sweet spot for me. I really like to hit 11 or 12 books read every single month. I don't know why those numbers just feel so good to me, but it feels like I've done enough, but not too much. Starting out right at the top, I read The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett. So Peter V. Brett is an old, I don't want to call him a classic because he was like early 2000s fantasy writer and I had not read any of his books yet. So The Warded Man, I believe, is his first book that he ever released. It is part of a 5-book series, and then there's another series that he wrote afterwards that is in the same world. I do own The Desert Prince, which is the first book in that series, and I will be continuing on with the Warded Man series, but I will not be purchasing any more in that series because I found the book absolutely okay. I rated it flat 3 stars. I had a good time with it. I saw some problematic elements with it. I had a few issues. There were some slow parts. There were some fast parts. I think the world was absolutely fantastic and really I'm excited to see more of how the world building goes, but I have no like want or need to own any more of his books. I'm going to keep The Desert Prince because it's absolutely gorgeous and I do want to physically read it one day, but I had his 4th book in the series and none of the other ones in this series, and I'm going to be unhauling that because I owned it in hardback and it's really hard to find his books in hardback, and so I don't feel the need to keep it and then try to complete the series. The Warded Man, we're following 3 different characters. Our main character is this young boy in the beginning, but you do see them all age from like young childhood up through adulthood. And he lives in this world where at night demons attack. And the only way to keep them from killing you and everything you own is to put wards around your house. And magicians and scholars have found ways to have people travel and stuff. But for the most part, everyone is afraid to travel more than a day's distance because they are afraid of being attacked. And one of the most important jobs in this world is the messenger. They go from city to city, transporting letters, transporting taxes, transporting whatever they need to. And our young boy thinks that that's what he wants to be one day when he grows up. The title is kind of weird because that character is the Warded Man, but you don't learn anything about why he's the Warded Man until like 70% through the book. I don't feel like it's a huge spoiler, but if you don't want to know, like turn away for like 10 seconds. But basically one day he finds himself realizing he doesn't want to do that job, finds himself with these distant people that are differently sighted about how things should be, and he realizes that he can put the wards on his body, like tattoo them on his body, and then the demons cannot hurt him, and so he becomes like a vigilante fighting the demons throughout the land. We are also following this young girl who is learning how to basically become a medicine woman, and her town does not like her because she's basically a feminist, but there are some issues with her storyline and some things that like really kind of bothered me, but also like it's not the worst female I've ever read written by a white man. And then we're also following this young boy whose entire family gets slaughtered in front of him, and he goes off to become, I believe the word they use is like a Jean something. He's basically like a jester who goes along with the messenger throughout the different cities, and he brings like fun and joy and like happiness to the people. Eventually all of our characters meet up and start to figure some things out and start to help each other and stuff, but it really, like, most of the book was kind of set up and build up for their story to take place later on, and I feel like it was more of like a prequel and getting me comfortable with the world, getting me comfortable with the characters, trying to figure out how they got here, than it was like an actual novel, which is why I'm more excited to go on to the sequel. I'm hoping it'll be much more like a novel like I'm used to in a fantasy setting. So some of the issues I had, obviously, if an author decides to write a desert dwelling people, they're going to pull every single stereotype out of the bag. And Peter V. Rent is not an exception to that. So there is a desert dwelling people. When you first hear about them, they sound like this amazing, smart group of people, but when you go to meet them, it's very much like the harmful stereotypes that you hear specifically about the Middle East, especially what you would hear here in America. The women are completely covered and not allowed to do many things at all, but they're basically slaves to their husbands. The men are aggressive. If you are not a fighter, you are not considered a man. If you're not considered a man, then you're not worthy of like people even speaking to you. And they are backstabbing and unloyal and cruel. That part wasn't great. The other big problematic element I found was with our main female character. She, of course, has like this chokehold on her virginity and like doesn't want to give it to anyone. And I will be talking about this book more in my in a video that's coming out in July, my Intimidating Reads vlog, which I'm so excited about this one. And one of the things I really focused on was like her virginity is like this huge thing to her that she holds on to like all of her life, and is like, I have to give it to the right man. And all these women around her like, no honey, like it literally doesn't matter. And then she, of course, loses her virginity to a forceful situation. And then within 24 hours, she's like having relations with a man that she just met. There were more issues I had with how that woman was written, but I had fun. I liked the demons attacking at night. I liked the wards, and I want to see more of that as I move forward. I felt very unconnected and very emotional towards any of our characters, but I'm hoping that will change as we go on. Up next, I read These Silent Woods, which is a mystery thriller about this man who lives in the woods in complete isolation with his young daughter. I think she's like 7 or 8, and they have been there basically her entire life. And the whole entire mystery is resolving around trying to figure out why he's hiding in the woods, why him and his daughter like can't go out amongst the people, because you know he committed some type of crime, but you're not sure what it was. And then also his wife, the daughter's mother, is dead, and so you're trying to figure out a little bit of like how she died. He used to be a soldier and he survives off the land, and they have this nosy neighbor, and so you're constantly paranoid between like, are people going to come and find him? Is he going to be found out? Is he a bad guy? Is he not a bad guy? What's going on? And every year on a certain date, his buddy from the military brings him certain needs that he couldn't like get off of the land. And when our book starts, this is the first year that his friend does not show up. So he's starting to get suspicious about that as well. I found the first 50% of this book to be very engaging. I was like, oh, is he gonna get found? Oh my God. There was this part where he had to like go into town and his daughter was hiding in the truck, and there was like this police officer kind of like snooping, and it like my heart was a pitter patter. But unfortunately, the second half of the book like really did not work for me, and it ended up undoing a lot of the enjoyment I had in the first half of the book. There's this whole trope where, not to spoil anything, but a woman shows up at the cabin, and it is such instant love that I like, it was gross. It was like really grossly done. I did not care for it. And then I didn't care for any of the any of the reveals that are told about our main man and like the crimes that he did and what he was willing to do to like get him and his daughter safe. And then the neighbor and the resolve with the neighbor, like I didn't like that either. So I ended up rating this book a 2-star, And I think there are much better thriller mystery books out there. I do have to say, though, I was shocked how much I was enjoying them in isolation, because I don't tend to normally enjoy characters by themselves excluded. I like to see interactions between characters. So this book held my interest and kept me interested, even with just like two characters kind of interacting or not interacting for the first half. Up next, I read When Villains Rise, which is the third and final book in the Market of Monsters trilogy by Rebecca Schaeffer. I've been reading these books over the last few months and I've been loving them. They are a YA dystopian horror fantasy magical realism type book, which have a lot of international myths and legends and folklore in them. And the book is the whole series is very international. I don't think there's a single moment. There might be like a few chapters where we are in the United States, but other than that, we are completely elsewhere in the world. To be fair, it's almost all South America and Canada. So we do stay in the Americas, but there are some references to places in Asia. I don't remember if Europe was mentioned ever, but that was one of the things I really enjoyed about this series, how world-centric it was and how it wasn't so focused on America. But the main thing I loved about this series was the morally gray characters and the discussions about love and friendship, morality and decision making. And Rebecca Schaeffer was such a good writer and she did it in such a good way. And yet it was so accessible to a YA audience. I love these books. I don't think I rated any of them 5 stars. I think they all got a 4.5, but I do believe that upon reread, which I will be doing at some point in my life, I might bump them up to a 5-star because they were phenomenal. So I can't really tell you what book 3 is about, but in book 1, we are following this young girl named Nida, and her mother is basically like a body hunter who hunts down these strange mythical creatures who appear humanoid, and she harvests them and gives them to Nida to dissect, and Nida dissects them and then they sell their body parts on the black market. Nida is like 17 or 18 years old. She wants to leave her mom and go away to college, but her mom is very controlling. And in a series of unfortunate events, Nida ends up on the black market herself because she does have the ability to heal her body at will. And so people are trying to harvest parts of her to eat so that they can become immortal. And when she's on the black market, she meets a few other creatures who are there as well and starts to learn more about the world that she has always been kept slightly distanced from, but been right up into it. There's a character that you meet kind of near the end of book 1, and oh my God, I love him so much. This book series is a trilogy. I listened to all 3 of them, but there are also webtoons for them, and I highly want to read those next. Like I want to read those so bad. So I rated this book a 4.5. Up next, I have The Final Strife, which was an arc I had, but it is out now, and I highly recommend you guys go check this one out. This is one of my 5-star books. I did order myself a copy, but it has not arrived yet because I wanted the UK edition, because I think it's beautiful and wonderful that we put lots of different types of people on front covers of books, but if I can buy a book without a person on the cover, I'm going to buy the edition without the person, just personal preference. I loved this book. So it is a black fantasy first book in a trilogy. It is a debut, but I will read anything this author writes at this point. Like, the writing in this book was phenomenal. She did such a good job. I'm kind of shooketh, honestly. When I think back to some of the lines that she had, I really want to reread this book and like annotate in my physical copy when I read it because it was so well done. This book is about this world where there are different factions and each faction has a blood type. So the rulers, which are called embers, have red blood and they can use magic and they are at the top. They are wealthy. They are doing pretty well for the most part. There are a few, but whatever. Then underneath them are the I can't remember what they're called right now. I can't remember, but they have blue blood. Oh my God. I talked about this on TikTok. If you want to remember the names, I will have my TikTok link down below. They have blue blood. They are kind of like a servant, lower income class. And then underneath them are the ghostings, which have clear blood, and they're slaves. So 20 years ago, the ghostings revolted against the embers. And so dusters, that's the blue blood. It's dusters. Anyways, the ghostings revolted against the embers and they failed in their rebellion. And when they failed, every single ghosting that is born after that time. Now, at birth, they have their hands and tongue removed, and then they are forced into slavery. So we are following a rebel organization that 20-ish years ago, right after that rebellion happened, decided that they needed to see some change. And so they swapped 12 babies from high ember families with 12 babies from duster families. So the whole entire idea was the ember babies would be raised amongst the dusters, so they would have an ember blood, but a duster heart. And then one day they would try to put them into positions of power, because the way that the wardens are chosen for this land, the leaders of this country, there's 4 of them, and every 10 years there is a trial. And if the topmost person who beats the trial is allowed to become like the person in training to become that person one day. And only embers can enter, because embers are the only ones who can use magic. So they get these 12 babies, they're going to raise them to understand and feel for dusters, and then put them into this trial so that they can go forward and do some good. So we are following one specific character. Her name is Sela. The day that she's supposed to sign up for her trial, goes off to find the baby that she was swapped with, because she just wants to see her. Sela has been having a lot of hard time throughout her life. She's struggling. She's addicted to drugs heavily. And so she's just kind of messed up and decides that she needs to go see what her life could have been before she signs up for this trial. And when she does, unfortunately, some incidents happen, and Honor, the duster baby who was left in her place, signs up instead of Sela. And so Honor tells her that she has to sit there and stay in the palace and train her on how to fight, because she signed up for the fighting trial and Honor doesn't know how to fight at all. And Sela decides to agree to that, but in exchange, she wants to be trained in blood magic. Since Honor was raised in the palace, even though she has duster blood and she cannot use magic, she was trained how to use magic. So she has all of the knowledge, but none of the ability, whereas Sela has all of the knowledge on fighting and is going to help Honor accomplish this goal. So it was really good. I know that summary is like super complicated, but I highly recommend this book. The 2 girls, it is sapphic, it is enemies to lovers. They are enemies at the beginning, and they really go through a great arc with each other. I really enjoyed seeing that. I don't know exactly what Honor's preferences are. I know she likes women, but I don't know if she likes anyone else besides women. But I do know that Sela is interested in both men and women, so that was great representation. Really quick, editing Amanda here, I forgot to mention that there's also trans and non-binary rep in this book, along with disability rep in this book. The characters who have their hands and tongues removed have their own form of sign language, and our main character Sela knows how to communicate with that sign language. And then also this culture believes in a third gender. I don't remember what they call it, but a non-binary gender system, and then also is very accepting of trans characters. One of our main characters is a character who is not cis. They are completely accepted and welcomed in this society. And then of course, every single character in the book is a POC. I believe that they are almost all Black, because it is African inspired, but if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was some Asian representation, but it's been a little bit, and so I can't totally remember, but I loved the book. It will be on my favorites of the year list. I'm so excited to get my copy and to put it on my shelf. I think I'm gonna put it right there. So yeah, in case you missed it, I rated that one 5 stars. Up next is The Nice House on the Lake, which is the one I rated the lowest. I rated it a flat 2 star though. I don't really have much to say about this. It was a graphic novel that I got from the publisher, and I got the first 6 volumes, and I only ended up reading the first volume because I hated it so much. End of world times are coming, but our characters don't know that, and a bunch of them are drawn into this house where they are trapped by this crazy man who says that the rest of the world is destroyed and they have to stay in this house. And that's as far as I got. That's all I have to say. I didn't like, there's so many characters, it was hard to keep them straight. The artwork wasn't that great, and it was flipping back and forth between like later day and like present day when they come to the house, and I was getting so lost and so confused, and I just didn't like it. Up next, finally something I can hold. I finally read The Empire's Ruin. I've had this book on my shelf for a year as of June or July. I don't remember right now, but it was the oldest book I had on my TBR, so I decided to pick it up this month, and I'm so glad I did, because Brian Staveley wrote the trilogy before, which I loved. It's actually book one is right there, which that book is part of the Unhewn Throne, where the three siblings are battling. Their father, the emperor, has just died, and each of them represents like a different part of a great ruler, and so they are struggling and fighting to figure out who's going to take over the throne next. And now he's writing this trilogy, which is The Ashes of the Unhewn Throne, which takes place after the events of book 3, and it's about 3 characters in like different parts of the world and trying to figure some things out. I don't want to say too much about it. I almost don't even want to tell you who's the main focus of this book, because it at least lets you know like who lives from the first series. If you're curious, I will say, and if you're not, you can skip ahead to when I'm no longer talking about this book. We are following Gwenna, she is a kestrel, so she is like an extreme fighter, and she has been asked by the person in charge, the ruler, whoever makes it to the emperor position, to go off and find more kestrels, which are fighting birds that they fight with. And then the kestrel, it's a little confusing. So the kestrel are the birds that they fight with, but the kestrel are also the people who fight with the birds. Not confusing at all, Brian Staveley. So she is tasked, she is one of the last, don't want to say that. So she is tasked with going off and finding more of these giant birds so that they can train with them. God, I loved this book. I think that this is my favorite Brian Staveley yet. There were some issues. There are always some problematic elements when you're going to be getting a book like this, but I enjoyed it so much. And I really liked almost all of it. So there's 3 POVs, like I said. I heavily enjoyed 2 of them, and then the third one, I feel like Brian Staveley does this every single time, where he has 3 POVs and one of them just doesn't get the same love that the other 2 get. So Gwenna and Rock, I was like so fascinated with. Rock goes through this whole entire competition and he's learning about leeches and magic and everything that is happening. Leeches in this world, in case you're unaware, are the people who can use magic, but they're basically outlawed and killed at birth. So only a few of them have moved on, and if they are able to grow up to adulthood, they are almost always like forced into the military. I love that whole entire commentary about how like magic is bad unless the government can use it. Great stuff that he said, especially in the first series. This one didn't talk too much about that. Rock goes through this whole entire like gladiator trial, but he is a priest to the goddess of love, so he's basically a pacifist and doesn't believe in fighting, but he was also raised by these gods who believe that fighting and violence are like a way of worship. So he's constantly battling his childhood beliefs versus what he as an adult chose to believe, versus like trying to keep himself alive because he's forced into this gladiator ring. Gwenna, going off and like there's kind of like this pirate theme with her where she's on the ship trying to find the kestrel. So good, so enjoyable. And then there's this third character whose name I can't even remember. Like I don't even think I learned it, to be honest. He was so little in the book, and he's trying to con the emperor into, basically he's pretending he knows information about the gates that help them travel between the different realms, and he doesn't actually know that information, but then like it turns out he does, but he does it. I didn't care about that part. I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. This was my favorite book I read this month. Actually, it got pretty high ratings on my call pile. I was a little shocked. But I did love it. And like I said, I think it's my favorite Brian Staveley that I've read yet. I am heavily disappointed though, because there's no news about book 2 at all yet. I mean, he says he's working on it, but there's no cover, no title, no release date, nothing. It's not even like on Goodreads as like an untitled book. So that makes me a little nervous. I would happily reread this before I would move on to the next one. Next, I read Plain Bad Heroines, which I also very much loved. This will also be a favorite of all time. This is an adult horror, and I felt like the horror could have been more there, but I have like no complaints beyond this. So this is another one where you're gonna have to sit down and get comfortable for me to explain what this book is about, because it's a lot. So in the late 1800s, there was this girls' boarding school, and at this girls' boarding school, some of the girls become obsessed with this book about learning how to become a plain bad heroine. And unfortunately, the 2 girls who are like mainly obsessed with this book die in this tragic accident. And when the book gets passed on to another girl who then later dies in another tragic accident. And so the school is under suspicion, trying to figure things out, and the headmistress is investigating things on her own a lot, even though she herself is a plain bad heroine. That's one of the stories that we're following, and we learn so much more about that story. There are parts of that throughout the book. We are also following this writer who has decided to write a nonfiction novelization about the story, those girls, Clara and Flo. Yes, Clara and Flo. And then a movie producer picks up the novelization, and we are following the two actresses that play Clara and Flo in the movie's adaptation of the novelization of the real life story. You don't learn a lot of why this is going to be problematic. Not problematic in like, oh, there are problematic elements, but like the story is problematic to these girls until like 50% through the book. Movie is haunted and bad things happen on set, and these girls are being haunted by things that were haunting the girls in the 1800s. This is a very slow build up. This is a very slow book. But one of the craziest things about this book is I've never read a horror, which also I would call a romance. And that's exactly what I would call this book. There were so many cute scenes where they would go on dates or they would be with each other. And I was like, this book is romantic as heck. Also, every single character in this book was part of the LGBTQ plus community. I believe there was representation of every single type of person, orientation, sexuality, gender that could be done. I know there were trans characters. I know there were non-binary characters. I know there were gay characters and sapphic characters, bisexual and pansexual characters. I'm trying to think. I believe there were asexual characters as well, which is bad because I'm asexual. I should remember if there was one or not. But it was just so good and so enjoyable. And I found myself flipping between like gushing over the cuteness and then also horror from the Yellow Jackets specifically. They are a huge element to the story. Highly recommend this book if you want to check out an adult horror. Up next, I read Wicked Beauty by Katie Roberts, and I probably will get through this one pretty quickly too. I don't have a ton to say about it that I haven't already said time and time again, to be honest. This is the third book in the Dark Olympian series, and this one we're following a couple. We're following a throuple, Achilles, Patroclus, and Helen as they get together, and there's also this whole entire trial kind of as the plot, but the plot really doesn't matter in these books, where Ares has passed and they are trying to figure out who can be the next Ares, and every character has to go through this like 3 trial system to figure out if they can be Ares or not, right? So the 3 of them, Achilles and Patroclus at the beginning of the story, are already a romantic couple, have been together for years, and they slowly start to realize that they also have feelings for Helen, and the 3 of them all get together. I enjoyed this book. It was fun, but I had a lot of issues with it as well. I think some of them I was supposed to have issues with, specifically Achilles and some of the decisions that he makes. I do not like them, but I also feel like a lot of the world building, again, is super flat. And just, if you like the first 2 books, you're going to like this one. If you didn't like the first 2 books, you're probably not going to like this one. And that's the most I can boil it down to. I'm enjoying them. I rated book 1 a 2.5, book 2 a 3, and then this one a 2.5. But I think this one was my second favorite, which is funny because a lot of people love Hades and Persephone, and I feel just kind of neutral about them, but I really enjoyed actually seeing a throuple. I thought that was a nice change up to what we've been having so far, because the first 2 books were heterosexual passing couples, because I believe that the first couple, I believe they are both pan or bi, and then I believe in book 2 it's a similar situation, but this one it was nice to have like something a little bit different. But to be completely honest, the smut was like not all that different. Like, you're gonna get the same, which it's fun and it's enjoyable, and Katie Roberts writes it really well. I like what she wrote, but it's nothing like grand or out there or crazy or anything. And the plot and the world building are very lacking. And the characters are fun, but I think she's lost a lot of her diversity that she had in the beginning of the books. Then next up, I read Wild Seed by Octavia E. Butler. which I didn't love. So I've read Kindred in the past and I loved Kindred. And then I saw someone online talking about Parable of the Sower, so I wanted to check that out. As of this moment, I have finished Parable of the Sower, but it was in July, so I'll be talking about it in July. But I couldn't get to Parable of the Sower right away, so I decided to pick up one of her other books, which was Wild Seed, and I think that was a mistake. Wild Seed was definitely my least favorite of the three that I have read. I ended up rating it a 2.5 star, kind of leaning towards a 2 star. Part of that is because the way the story is told is not one that I am super in love with, which is basically it's like a saga. You start out, like you pass hundreds of years with these characters, and that's not my favorite way of telling a story. You get like little snippets of their life throughout, and then you like pass another 100 years. I've always been kind of against that. But I also was not in love with some of the themes and discussions that were had. I was in love with some of them, but some of them just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. What Wild Seed is about, we are really following these two immortals through decades of time. We start off right when they meet. Our main female immortal, she has the ability to basically control her body and shapeshift at will. And our main male immortal transports his spirit from body to body. So he lives forever, but he has to like jump bodies every few weeks. And so he's constantly like changing and taking over other people's lives. And he has made it his life's mission to breed humans, like bizarre humans who seem to have like some abilities, to try and get a race of people that could live forever with him. And so he comes across our woman who's like living her best life in Africa. She has grandkids, great-great-grandkids. She's been married a couple of times, has tons of children, has watched them all die, and is sad about that fact. And he tells her about his like breeding program and takes her back to America, where he wants to breed her with some of his people to see if he can one day get another immortal like them. And it's about the two of them like struggling and fighting throughout decades. And it's about loneliness and trying to not be so lonely. And it's about power and how power is taken and how it is different from men to women. And it's about savagery and the differences between white Eurocentric culture versus Black African culture, and how I really liked what she had to say about how African people could see white people living in the Americas as savages, and why, you know, she kind of flipped some of the terms that, you know, the white colonizers would have used against Black and Indigenous people at the time and used it against them. So that was really interesting and like just a great take. But what she had to say about loneliness and about men versus women, I was not in love with. And then I also did not love the focus so heavily being on breeding, especially because I think I would have been fine with it if one of our characters had been like, yeah, breeding, and then the other one had been like, no, not breeding. But kind of both of them were like, yes, breeding. And so I just couldn't get behind all of that. Don't have a ton to say. There were a lot of things that happened in this book that were very hard to digest. This is not a book for like the weak of heart. I would recommend it in certain circles, but I myself did not love it. And then I read In a Garden Burning Gold by Rory Powers, which I rated a 4.5, but I'm calling it a favorite of the year. I definitely am. I loved this book. And the whole entire reason why I rated it a 4.5 kind of boiled down to a few conclusions that happened near the like last 10% of the book. Just didn't absolutely love them as much as I loved the rest of the book. But this is Rory Powers' first adult fantasy book. She is a YA horror author previously. She wrote Wilder Girls and I always forget the title of the orange one. Hold up, I think it's at the back here. Burn Our Bodies Down. And this is going to be a fantasy duology. And if you are a fan of slow burn, slow build political fantasy, you're going to like this book. The magic is amazing, absolutely phenomenal. Rory Power did such a good job writing this beautiful magic system, unlike anything I've ever seen before. So we are following these two twins. Their father is the leader of their land, and he is losing a lot of control over his land. His oldest son, the twin that we are following, has the ability to embroider the night sky into fabric and control the constellations and control the tides and the storms. And then the oldest daughter has the ability to change the seasons. But the way she changes the seasons is she has to marry a consort from their land. And when they want the season to change, she has to murder them. We start off at the beginning where she has just murdered her last consort and winter is now starting. And she is getting ready to marry her next one. They have been alive for hundreds of years. When you get into this position of power, you have immortality along with all these other magical gifts that you can have. The father has the ability to speak people's names and kill them, but he has to do it in such a like prayerful way. It's beautiful how it's done, honestly. She picks her next consort. Her father wants her to pick one person. Her brother wants her to pick another. It's all very politically based as to why she should pick one or the other. She makes up her mind and picks one of them. And I'm not going to tell you which one she goes with, but she goes off to live with this consort for the month of winter and is investigating the rebel faction there at that land. And when she is there, the whole entire idea is that she would investigate the rebels and then one day kill the leader of the rebels, which they are assuming is the person she married when she went there. Just so beautifully written, so well done. You've got another enemies to lovers storyline here. Magic, slow burn. I was obsessed. I was obsessed with the politics. I was obsessed with the magic system. I was obsessed with the characters. I do have to say I preferred our main character Ria's perspective more than Lexos's perspective, but there were moments when I was with Lexos that I was like very, very into it. And this book has such bad reviews on Goodreads, and I think it's because it just was for the wrong audience. People who would be reading Rory Powers' books would not be into this. I understand that, but if you're into high epic fantasy, slow political build, I highly recommend this. If you liked Priory of the Orange Tree, I think you're going to like this one. If you liked the politics and the heavy world building of Priory, but you didn't like other aspects, you're going to like this. Absolutely phenomenal. One of my favorites. I cannot wait to read the sequel one day. And then finally, I was hosting a readathon with my book club this month, and so to get the last prompt, I had to read something not only short, but picked out by someone else. So I dabbled in some more manga this month, which I didn't mark as different. I marked graphic novels as different, but I didn't mark manga as different. So that's really interesting. Anyways, I'm gonna have to think about why I did that. I read Tokyo Ghoul. I read the first, I think it's like a volume. There was like 6 issues inside of it. So I think that's what you call a volume. It's about this boy who lives in Tokyo, and there are these ghouls that are attacking. They live through the city. They look completely like humans and they feast on human flesh. And so humans are trying to figure out why they're attacking more and what's going on and how to stop them and everything. And one day our boy goes on this date, and when he's on this date, they're about to like walk home. He thinks she's like the perfect girl. She's a ghoul. Oh my God, she's trying to eat him. He barely gets out alive. The ghoul dies. The doctor who is performing and trying to save our boy's life does not know that that woman was a ghoul, and decides in a quick, brash way to save one of his patients. He takes her organs and puts it in him, and so our boy wakes up and he has some ghoulish qualities. Most of this issue was about him dealing with like the idea that he's a monster now who eats human flesh. A lot of it was him trying to deny that and trying to stay as human as he possibly could. I didn't hate it. I didn't absolutely love it either. I think some of the issues I had was I was reading it on my phone, and the way that it was like set up on Libby on my phone was so hard to understand some of the panels. Like I couldn't like get in and like look at them. So I was like lost for a large portion of the book. But unfortunately I could not get my hands on a physical copy. I also didn't love some of the portrayals of women, but I think that's kind of a matter with a lot of manga, to be honest. I rated this a 3 out of 5 star. Honestly, I think it was fine. I think maybe some of the later volumes would probably get better, be more actionful. I don't know if I would continue on or not, but I didn't hate it. I had a decent enough time. There were times I actually chuckled out loud, which was very nice to have happen, but overall, like, it didn't leave a lasting impact on me. Those were all of the books that I read in June and what I thought about them. I hope you all had a really good June reading month. Look back pretty positively on it, to be honest. I mean, having 4 books, I don't have the 4th one yet, but having 4 books that I could rate basically a 5 star and call them favorites forever felt so phenomenal. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're all good. Leave me a like. That would be really awesome. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye.